Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is Strange Tales 104, cover dated January of 1963. This issue marks the first appearance of minor villain, Paste Pot Pete, and was written by Stan Lee and Larry Lieber, drawn by Jack Kirby, inked by Dick Ayers, and lettered by Art Simek. Our issue opens up with a striking splash page, teasing the Human Torch's coming battle with the wicked Paste Pot Pete. But before we can witness such an epic showdown, we must first travel to a local bank, where Johnny's depositing a check into his savings account. But as he's waiting in line for the teller, an oddly dressed figure carrying a gun and an oozing bucket of glue barges into the bank. He announces himself as Paste Pot Pete, and then shoots the teller. But instead of firing bullets, his gun fires a blast of glue that sticks the teller to the wall. A nearby guard then reaches for his pistol, but Pete fires at his hand and pastes it to his holster. Realizing that Paste Pot Pete's not an ordinary crook, Johnny knows it's up to him to stop him. Yet he can't just flame on in the bank, as he still has a secret identity to protect. So while the patrons are distracted, he sneakily ignites his finger and then casts a fiery duplicate after Pete, who by this point has stolen a bunch of money and is now fleeing the bank. But while the flaming duplicate can somehow pursue Paste Pot Pete, it can't do much else. Thus a group of bystanders berate the torch for being seemingly useless, and then try to stop Pete themselves. But before they can even take a single step towards him, he glues their feet to the ground, and runs off. A police car follows suit, but Pete seals all of its windows and doors with glue, thus trapping the policeman inside. And since they're apparently unwilling to just run him over, they've pretty much been rendered useless. But it doesn't matter, as somehow Johnny's flaming duplicate is still on Pete's trail. And speaking of trail, the duplicate's giving off a trail of visible heat waves, which the real Johnny, who's flamed on in an empty alley, follows to pursue the fleeing Pete. But having hopped onto a motorcycle, Paste Pot Pete's able to speed his way ahead of the torch. By the time the hero catches up to him, he's abandoned the motorcycle on the side of the road, and switched to a large truck. As the torch then struggles to find him, Pete drives the truck to a nearby military base. A pair of MPs try to stop him from getting in, but he just glues them in place, and then gags them with a strip of paste. He then drives his truck onto a live testing range. He's there to steal an experimental missile, which he plans to then sell back to either the US or a hostile nation, whichever will pay him more. So to steal it, Pete opens up a secret hatch on the roof of his truck. Inside's a massive glue cannon that he then fires at the missile just as it's launching. Landing a direct hit, all Pete has to do now is drive off and the missile's his. So that's exactly what he does, while gluing in place any soldiers foolish enough to try to stop him. But somehow the flaming duplicate's still following him, and thus the torches had enough time to chase its trail and catch up to Pete. So to take him down, he first tries piercing his tires with a volley of flaming spears. Yet somehow Pete's able to maneuver his massive box truck around all of the spears. So the torch then burns a ditch in front of the truck, a move that actually forces Pete to stop and get out. Yet instead of attacking him while he's vulnerable, the torch apparently does nothing, as he gives Pete enough time to retrieve a pair of wood planks from a nearby pile of lumber, make a makeshift bridge over the ditch, and then drive away. Regardless, the torch then flies after Pete, but suddenly finds that his flames burned out, as he can only remain on fire for so long. Falling out of the sky, Johnny happens to land on top of a massive rocket, which Pete glues him to the side of. This glue then seeps into the rocket itself, and somehow triggers its automatic launch system. Thus it soars mightily into the sky, with Johnny still attached. But in a surprise turn of events, the intense heat of the launch revives Johnny's powers. Yet he hesitates to flame on, as he's afraid he'll accidentally ignite the rocket's warhead. But then, Johnny realizes that if he carefully ignites just one finger, he might be able to burn away the glue and escape. So he does just that, and delicately frees himself from the rocket, which only seconds later, crashes into the ocean and explodes. But Johnny'll have to worry about that later, as he then flames on, and flies his way back to Paste Pot Pete. Not taking any chances this time, the torch immediately destroys Pete's truck with a volley of fireballs. So Pete comes out to battle him head-on, but the torch quickly hits his bucket of glue. Like a hand on a hot stove, Pete's forced to drop the now red-hot bucket. But in doing so, he accidentally detaches it from his gun. Thus he's only left with enough glue for a single shot. And don't think that he can just run away, as the torches surrounded him in a wall of flame. But even if Pete could land his only shot on the torch, they both know that it wouldn't be enough to take him down. So Pete does something clever, as he fires his only shot at a passing airplane. Acting as a makeshift grappling hook, the stream of glue quickly solidifies, and takes Pete with it. The torch tries to fly after him, but finds that his flame's too weak again. So he instead runs off to a nearby control tower, and radios the pilot on what's going on. I'm not sure what he expects the pilot to do, but it doesn't matter, as when Pete spots a familiar boat floating in the ocean, he lets go of his gun and dives in. He then climbs aboard the boat, as apparently it's his getaway. The issue subsequently ends as we see the torch speaking with officials from the bank and the military, as the formers retrieve the stolen money, and the latters retrieve the stolen missile. That concludes the Human Torch story in Strange Tales 104, and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was a fairly average and unremarkable story. Something I appreciated about it was that it didn't bother with a lengthy intro or villain origin story, it just got right into the action. But in doing so, it also skipped a lot of the stuff that makes issues compelling and interesting on a story level. So I guess this issue comes down to what you prefer, action or depth. I tend to enjoy both, so with a lot of action but not that much depth, I thought that this story came out to be pretty average. But in any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.